The summer sun beat down on the ancient cobblestone plaza outside Buckingham Palace as thousands of tourists gathered to witness the legendary changing of the guard ceremony. Among the crowd stood Marcus Webb, a quiet man in his early 30s who had served as a royal guard for nearly 8 years. His red tunic was perfectly pressed, his bearskin hat stood tall and proud, and his face remained as still as stone. To the watching crowd, he was simply another silent sentinel, a living statue performing his duty. But if you're enjoying this incredible true story, make sure to subscribe to our channel and press that bell icon so you never miss another amazing tale like this one. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. Nobody in that crowd could have imagined that within the next hour. Marcus would face the most terrifying moment of his career. Nobody knew that somewhere among those thousands of faces lurked a dangerous criminal who had been on the run for 3 months. And absolutely nobody could have predicted how Marcus Booth would respond when this fugitive made a choice that would change everything. The morning had started like any other for Marcus. He had woken at 5 in the morning, performed his daily exercises, and arrived at the barracks by 6. The routine was comforting in its predictability. Dress uniform inspection at 6:30. Briefing at 7. March to position at 7:45. For 8 years, Marcus had followed this pattern without complaint. He took pride in his work, in the discipline it required, in the honor it represented. As he stood at his post that morning, Marcus noticed the usual mix of tourists. There were families with children pointing excitedly at the guards. There were elderly couples holding hands and smiling at memories. There were young backpackers taking selfies and giggling at the guards who refused to react to their antics. Some tourists tried to make the guards laugh. Others tried to touch the uniforms or get too close. Marcus had seen it all before. What Marcus did not notice, at least not at first, was the man standing alone near the palace gates. This man was not taking pictures. He was not smiling. He was not distracted by the ceremony or the spectacle. Instead, he stood very still, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of a worn jacket despite the summer heat. His eyes darted nervously across the crowd, then to the guards, then back to the crowd again. This man was Ryan Holloway, and he had not slept in a proper bed for 93 days. 3 months earlier, Ryan had been involved in an armed robbery that went horribly wrong. A convenience store clerk had been injured. Security footage had captured Ryan's face clearly. Within 24 hours, his picture was everywhere. The police had raided his apartment, but Ryan had already fled. Since then, he had been moving from place to place, sleeping in abandoned buildings, stealing food when he could. Growing more desperate with each passing day, Ryan had come to London thinking he could disappear in the crowd. A big city meant anonymity, or so he thought. But paranoia had taken root in his mind. He saw police officers everywhere. He imagined people recognizing him from the news. Every siren made his heart race. Every stranger's glance felt like an accusation. The constant fear was eating him alive from the inside out. On this particular morning, Ryan had made a terrible decision. He had obtained a handgun through contacts he had made in London's underground. The weight of it in his jacket pocket felt both terrifying and somehow comforting. He told himself he would never use it. He told himself it was just for protection. He told himself he would be fine. But Ryan Holloway had not been fine for a very long time as the ceremony continued. Something happened that triggered Ryan's fragile mental state. A police officer on routine patrol walked past him, radio crackling with routine chatter. The officer barely glanced at Ryan, but in Ryan's paranoid mind, that glance lasted an eternity. He was certain he had been recognized. He was certain the officer was about to call for backup. His breathing quickened. His palms grew sweaty. His hand moved instinctively to the gun in his pocket. Ryan started to move away from the officer, pushing through the crowd without care for politeness or caution. People muttered complaints as he shoved past them. A mother pulled her child closer. An elderly man stumbled slightly. Ryan's panic was building like a pressure cooker about to explode. He needed to get away. He needed to run. But the crowd was too thick, pressing in from all sides. That was when Ryan made eye contact with Marcus Webb. The Royal Guard stood perfectly still at his post, rifle held at precisely the correct angle, expression completely neutral. In that moment, something in Ryan's damaged mind convinced him that this guard was part of the trap, that the guard was watching him specifically, that the guard knew exactly who he was and what he had done. The rational part of Ryan's brain, what little remained of it, tried to tell him this was absurd. Royal guards stood still and watched nothing in particular. They were ceremonial. They were tourists' attractions. But the paranoid, desperate, frightened animal that Ryan had become did not listen to reason anymore. All he could think was that he needed to create a distraction, something big enough to let him escape. Ryan's hand closed around the grip of the gun in his pocket. His finger found the trigger, and as hundreds of tourists watched the colorful ceremony, completely unaware of the danger in their midst, Ryan Holloway made a choice that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He began to pull the weapon from his pocket, his wild eyes locked on the silent guard who stood unwavering at his post. Marcus Webb had learned long ago to see without appearing to look. 8 years of standing perfectly still while crowds swirled around him had taught him how to notice things that others missed. He could spot a pickpocket working through tourists. He could identify security threats before they escalated. He could sense when someone in the crowd was behaving strangely. And right now, every instinct Marcus had developed over his years of service was screaming at him that something was very wrong. With the man in the worn jacket, the training Marcus had received was not just about standing still and looking impressive. Royal Guards were real soldiers, trained for combat situations, prepared for emergencies. They had learned how to assess threats, how to respond to attacks, how to protect themselves and others. Marcus had gone through countless hours of scenario training. He had practiced responses to every conceivable danger. But nothing could fully prepare a person for the moment when training became reality. As Ryan's hand emerged from his pocket with the gun, time seemed to slow down for Marcus. He saw the weapon catching the sunlight. He saw the wild desperation in Ryan's eyes. He saw the crowd around them still laughing and taking pictures, completely unaware that death had just arrived in their midst. Marcus understood immediately that dozens of people could die in the next few seconds. Children could be caught in crossfire. Innocent tourists could become victims. Everything depended on what happened next. The standing orders for Royal Guards in such situations were clear. If threatened with a weapon, guards were authorized to respond with appropriate force. Marcus had his rifle. It was loaded. He could raise it and fire before Ryan could aim properly. That was what his combat training told him to do. Eliminate the threat. Protect the crowd. Follow protocol. But something made Marcus hesitate, made him consider a different path. In that frozen moment, Marcus looked past the gun and past the threat. And he really saw Ryan Holloway for the first time. He saw a man who was trembling. He saw eyes that were filled not with hatred, but with pure terror. He saw someone who looked like they had not eaten properly or slept soundly in weeks. Marcus had served in Afghanistan before joining the Royal Guard. He had seen combat. He had seen what people looked like when they truly wanted to kill, and what he saw in Ryan's face was not a killer. He saw someone who was cornered, desperate, and utterly lost. The tourists around them were beginning to notice that something was wrong. A woman gasped. A man grabbed his daughter and pulled her back. The festive atmosphere was cracking like thin ice. Within seconds, someone would scream. The crowd would panic. People would run in all directions. In that chaos, Ryan might fire the gun accidentally or intentionally. The situation was balanced on a knife's edge. Marcus made his decision. Instead of raising his rifle, instead of shouting orders, instead of treating Ryan as an enemy combatant, Marcus did something that nobody expected. He remained perfectly still, maintaining his position as a guard, but he spoke. His voice was quiet, so quiet that only Ryan could hear him clearly. His tone was calm, measured, without any hint of judgment or anger. "You don't want to do this," Marcus said, his lips barely moving, his eyes still facing forward as protocol demanded. "I can see that you don't want to do this." Ryan's hand was shaking so badly that the gun wavered in the air. Tears were streaming down his face, though he seemed unaware of them. His breathing came in ragged gasps. He looked at Marcus with confusion. Why was this guard not reacting? Why was he not raising his weapon? Why was he not calling for backup? The lack of an aggressive response was disorienting Ryan, breaking through his panic just slightly. "Listen to me," Marcus continued, still maintaining his guard posture, still speaking softly. "Whatever brought you here, whatever happened, this is not the way forward. You point that gun at me, and this ends badly for everyone. For you, for me, for all these people around us. Is that what you want?" Ryan's mouth opened, but no words came out. He wanted to say that he did not know what he wanted anymore. He wanted to explain that he was just so tired, so scared, so completely alone. But his voice would not work. All he could manage was a slight shake of his head. No, this was not what he wanted. He did not want to hurt anyone. He had never wanted to hurt anyone. The robbery had been about money, about desperation, about bad choices. Now everything had spiraled so far beyond his control. Marcus could see other guards becoming aware of the situation. He could sense security personnel starting to move. In moments, this plaza would be swarming with armed officers. Ryan would be surrounded. The likelihood of violence would increase dramatically. If Marcus was going to prevent bloodshed, he had to act now. He had to take a risk that went against all standard procedures. Very slowly. Maintaining eye contact with Ryan, Marcus did something that shocked everyone who witnessed it. He began to lower his rifle. Not quickly, not in a threatening way, but deliberately placing it down on the ground beside him. He straightened back up, still in his formal guard position. Now completely unarmed before a man with a gun. The crowd around them had gone silent. Those who understood what they were seeing could not believe it. A royal guard had just disarmed himself in front of a threat. It was unthinkable. It was against every rule. It was either the bravest or the most foolish thing anyone had ever seen. "There," Marcus said, his voice still calm, still steady. "Now, it's just you and me talking. No weapons. Just two people. Whatever you're running from, whatever you're afraid of, shooting me will not fix it. You know that? I think you've always known that. So let's figure out a better way, yeah?" Ryan stared at the guard who had just made himself completely vulnerable. The gun in Ryan's hand suddenly felt impossibly heavy. What was he doing? What had he been about to do? The fog of panic that had controlled him for 3 months seemed to clear slightly. He looked around at the crowd, at the children hiding behind their parents, at the fear he had created. He looked at Marcus, standing there without his rifle, trusting Ryan not to shoot him. That trust, offered by a complete stranger, cracked something open inside Ryan's chest. The silence in the plaza was broken only by the distant sounds of London traffic and the frightened breathing of tourists who had pressed themselves against walls and behind barriers. Marcus could see armed police officers taking positions at the perimeter, their weapons trained on Ryan. He could hear the crackle of radios. He knew that snipers were probably finding vantage points on nearby rooftops. The entire security apparatus of one of Britain's most protected locations was mobilizing. Time was running out. Ryan's arm was beginning to drop. The weight of the gun and the weight of what he had almost done pulling it downward. But he had not let go of the weapon. He had not surrendered. He stood frozen between two futures, unable to commit to either one. Marcus understood that Ryan was teetering on the edge of a decision that would define the rest of his life. However long or short that life might be. "My name is Marcus," the guard said, breaking another protocol by identifying himself. "What's yours?" The question was so simple, so human, so unexpected that it penetrated Ryan's defenses more effectively than any weapon could have. Nobody had asked his name in months. He had been invisible, a ghost moving through the city, acknowledged by no one. Now this guard, this man who should have been his enemy, was asking him the most basic question possible. Ryan's lips trembled as he struggled to answer. "Ryan," he whispered, his voice hoarse from disuse and emotion. "My name is Ryan, K. Ryan," Marcus said, and somehow the way he said it made Ryan feel like a person again, rather than a criminal or a threat. "I want you to listen to me very carefully. In about 30 seconds, maybe less, the people surrounding us are going to lose patience. They're going to see you as too much of a threat. They're going to take action. I don't want that to happen. I don't think you want that to happen. So we need to end this situation together right now, in a way that means everyone goes home tonight. Can you help me do that?" Ryan looked into Marcus's eyes and saw something he had not seen directed at him in longer than he could remember. He saw a genuine concern. Not fear, not anger, not contempt, but actual human concern. This stranger was worried about him. This guard was risking his own life to talk him down. Ryan had spent 3 months running from everyone, trusting no one. And now the first person to offer him any kindness was someone he had just threatened with a gun. "I can't go to prison," Ryan said, his voice breaking. "I can't. I'll die in there. I'm not strong enough. I'm not brave enough. I can't do it." Marcus nodded slightly, acknowledging Ryan's fear without dismissing it. "I understand you're scared. Prison is frightening. But you know what's more frightening? Your mother getting a phone call saying you're dead. Your family attending your funeral. People remembering you as someone who hurt innocent people. That's worse than prison, Ryan. That's forever. Prison is not forever. You get through it. You survive. You get another chance. But if this goes wrong right here, right now, there are no more chances." The mention of Ryan's mother hit him like a physical blow. He had not let himself think about her for weeks. The pain was too intense. She had raised him alone after his father left. She had worked 2 jobs to keep him fed and clothed. She had cried when he graduated high school. And he had repaid her by becoming a criminal, by disappearing, by breaking her heart. What would she say if she could see him now? What would she think of the man he had become? "She thinks I'm dead already," Ryan said, tears flowing freely now. "She probably thinks I'm dead. Maybe that's better. Maybe she should think that." "No," Marcus said firmly, his voice gaining strength while remaining calm. "No mother thinks losing her son is better than anything else. You can fix this, Ryan. Not all of it, not today, but you can start. You can make a choice right now that says you're not the worst thing you've ever done. You can choose to be better than this moment." Around them, Marcus could sense the security perimeter tightening. He could see the red laser dots of sniper rifles dancing nervously near Ryan's position. He could hear a helicopter approaching. The Metropolitan Police tactical team had probably arrived. Every second that passed increased the likelihood that someone would make a tactical decision to end this situation with force. Marcus knew he had to push harder, had to break through Ryan's defenses completely. "I'm going to take a step toward you," Marcus announced, his voice still quiet but clear. "I'm not armed. I'm not going to hurt you. I'm just going to step closer so we can talk better. Is that okay with you?" This was insane. Every tactical manual ever written would condemn what Marcus was doing. Moving closer to an armed, unstable individual was exactly what you were never supposed to do. But Marcus had made a calculation based not on training manuals, but on his read of Ryan's character. He believed that Ryan was not a violent person by nature. He believed that Ryan was looking for a way out and just needed someone to show him the path. Ryan did not object. So Marcus took one careful step forward, then another, then a third. Now he was close enough that Ryan could shoot him without any possibility of missing. The crowd gasped. Someone in the distance shouted for Marcus to get back. But Marcus kept his eyes on Ryan and took one more step, bringing him within arm's reach of the gun. "Give it to me," Marcus said softly, extending his hand. "Just place it in my hand. That's all you have to do. One simple action. Move your arm, open your fingers, let go. I promise you that I will make sure nobody hurts you. I will stay with you. I will make certain you're treated fairly. But you have to trust me. You have to make that choice." Ryan looked at Marcus's extended hand. It was steady, not shaking at all. How could this man be so calm? How could he stand there, unarmed, asking a desperate fugitive to hand over a loaded weapon? It made no sense. Unless Marcus genuinely believed that Ryan was not a monster. Unless Marcus saw something in Ryan that Ryan himself had forgotten was there. The gun felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Ryan's entire body was trembling. He thought about his mother. He thought about the convenience store clerk he had helped injure. He thought about all the choices that had led him to this moment. And then he thought about what Marcus had said. "You're not the worst thing you've ever done. You can choose to be better than this moment." Slowly, so slowly that it seemed to take forever, Ryan began to move his arm. The gun lifted slightly, rotated, and then extended toward Marcus's waiting hand. The crowd held its breath collectively. Security forces tensed, ready to shoot if this was a feint. Marcus remained perfectly still, his hand open, waiting. The moment Ryan's fingers released the gun into Marcus's hand felt like the entire world exhaled at once. Marcus closed his hand around the weapon carefully, his movements still calm and measured, and immediately pointed it toward the ground. He engaged the safety with practiced ease, then set the gun down on the cobblestones far from either of them. Only then did he return his attention fully to Ryan, who had collapsed to his knees, his body shaking with sobs. Marcus knelt down beside Ryan, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You did it," Marcus said quietly. "You made the right choice. I'm proud of you." It's those words. "I'm proud of you," struck Ryan with overwhelming force. He could not remember the last time someone had said they were proud of him. Certainly not in the past year. Certainly not since everything in his life had fallen apart. Within seconds, armed police officers surrounded them. Their commands were sharp and professional. "Hands behind your head. Get on the ground. Don't move." Ryan complied without resistance, his body limp with exhaustion and relief. As officers handcuffed him and began reading his rights, Ryan kept his eyes on Marcus, who remained kneeling beside him, one hand still on his shoulder. "I'll keep my promise," Marcus said, as police began to lift Ryan to his feet. "I'll make sure people know what happened here. I'll tell them you've surrendered peacefully. I'll tell them you chose not to hurt anyone. That matters, Ryan. That counts for something." Ryan nodded, unable to speak through his tears. As officers led him away toward a waiting police vehicle, he looked back at Marcus one final time. The Royal Guard was standing now, back in his formal position, though his rifle remained on the ground. He gave Ryan a small nod, a gesture of acknowledgement and respect. Then Ryan was placed in the police car, and the door closed, separating him from the man who had saved his life by trusting him with that life. The plaza erupted into chaos after Ryan was secured. Tourists who had been frozen in fear suddenly found their voices. People were crying, hugging each other, checking on their children. News cameras that had been filming the ceremony now focused on the spot where the confrontation had occurred. Reporters were already calling it a hostage situation, a terrorist incident. Using dramatic language that bore little resemblance to what had actually happened, Marcus was immediately surrounded by superior officers demanding explanations. Why had he put down his weapon? Why had he approached an armed suspect? Why had he not followed protocol? The questions came rapid fire, filled with anger and concern in equal measure. Marcus stood at attention and answered each query honestly. He explained his assessment of the situation. He described Ryan's demeanor and behavior. He detailed his reasoning for the approach he had taken. Some officers were furious, insisting that Marcus had endangered himself and everyone present. Others were quietly amazed that no shots had been fired, that no one had been injured, that a potentially deadly situation had ended with nothing more serious than emotional trauma. The debate about Marcus's actions would continue for weeks within the security services. Some would call him a hero. Others would call him reckless. Marcus himself did not care much about either label. He had done what felt right in the moment, and everyone had survived. That was enough for him. The media coverage of the incident was immediate and overwhelming. Within an hour, video footage from tourist phones showing Marcus putting down his rifle and approaching Ryan had gone viral. The images spread across social media platforms worldwide. News organizations ran the story continuously, with experts debating Marcus's tactics. Some praised his courage and compassion. Others criticized him for taking unnecessary risks. The public overwhelmingly saw him as a hero. Marcus found the attention deeply uncomfortable. He had not acted seeking recognition. He had simply responded to a human being in crisis with the same humanity he hoped others would show him if their positions were reversed. But the story had captured something people needed to see. In a world that often felt violent and divided, here was an example of someone choosing empathy over aggression, trust over force. People were hungry for that kind of story. Ryan Holloway was taken to a secure police facility where he was processed, questioned, and evaluated by mental health professionals. The psychiatrist who examined him determined that Ryan was suffering from severe anxiety and depression, conditions that had been exacerbated by months of life on the run. Ryan provided full details about the robbery that had started his troubles. He cooperated completely with investigators. When asked why he had surrendered peacefully, Ryan spoke about Marcus at length, describing how the guard's calm presence and genuine concern had cut through his panic. The convenience store clerk, who had been injured in Ryan's original crime, was contacted by police about the arrest. Her name was Patricia Morris, and she was a grandmother who had worked at the store for 15 years. She had suffered a broken arm when Ryan's accomplice had pushed her during the robbery. Patricia read the news coverage about what had happened at Buckingham Palace with mixed feelings. She was glad no one had been hurt. She was impressed by the guard's handling of the situation. But she was also angry at Ryan for what he had done to her, the pain and fear he had caused. The legal process moved forward methodically. Ryan was charged with armed robbery, possession of an illegal firearm, and several lesser offenses. His lawyer argued for leniency based on his mental state, his peaceful surrender, and the fact that he had shown remorse. The prosecution pushed for significant prison time, arguing that Ryan had made multiple bad choices and needed to face serious consequences. The case became a focal point for larger discussions about crime, punishment, mental health, and rehabilitation. Throughout the weeks following the incident, Marcus received hundreds of messages from people around the world. Some thanked him for his bravery. Others shared their own stories of struggle and redemption. Several letters came from people who said Marcus's actions had inspired them to show more compassion in their own lives. A few letters came from military veterans who understood the split-second decision Marcus had made and supported him completely. But the letter that affected Marcus most deeply came from an address he did not recognize. When he opened it, he found a handwritten note from Catherine Holloway, Ryan's mother. She thanked Marcus for not killing her son. She thanked him for seeing Ryan as a person rather than just a threat. She explained that Ryan had struggled with mental health issues for years, that she had tried to get him help, that she blamed herself for not doing more. She wrote that whatever happened next, she was grateful Ryan was alive and had a chance to make things right. That letter Marcus kept in his desk drawer and read whenever he doubted whether he had done the right thing. 3 months after the incident, Marcus received notice that he had been summoned to testify at Ryan's trial. The prosecution wanted him to describe the events from his perspective. The defense hoped his testimony would support their argument for leniency. Marcus agreed to testify, though he felt uncomfortable with the attention it would bring. He prepared carefully, reviewing his memories of that day, making certain he could describe everything accurately. The courtroom was packed on the day Marcus appeared. Reporters filled the gallery. Ryan's mother sat in the front row, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Patricia Maurice, the injured clerk, was also present, wanting to hear what everyone had to say. When Marcus entered wearing his dress uniform, a respectful silence fell over the room. Even the judge seemed impressed by his bearing and composure. Marcus took the oath and seated himself in the witness box. The prosecutor began with straightforward questions about his service record, his training, and the events of that summer day. Marcus answered clearly and factually, neither exaggerating nor downplaying what had occurred. He described seeing Ryan, recognizing the signs of psychological distress, making the decision to de-escalate rather than engage with force. When asked if he had been afraid, Marcus paused before answering honestly. Yes, I was afraid. But I was more afraid of what would happen if I responded with aggression. I believed there was a better way to handle the situation, and I decided to try that way first. The defense attorney's questions focused on Marcus's perception of Ryan's intent. In your professional assessment, did you believe Ryan Holloway intended to hurt anyone that day? Marcus thought carefully before responding. I believed he was in crisis. I saw someone who was desperate and frightened, not someone who wanted to cause harm. His body language, his facial expression, the way he was holding the weapon, none of it indicated someone who was committed to violence. It indicated someone who was lost and making bad decisions out of panic. Would you say Ryan posed a deadly threat? The attorney pressed. Any person with a loaded firearm poses a potential deadly threat, Marcus replied. But potential and probable are different things. I made a judgment call that the probability of violence could be reduced through communication and de-escalation. I believed the greater danger was in treating him as an enemy rather than as a person in crisis. The prosecutor objected to this characterization, arguing that Marcus's opinion about Ryan's mental state was not professional psychological assessment. The judge sustained the objection but allowed Marcus to continue describing his observations and the reasoning behind his actions. What emerged from Marcus's testimony was a portrait of those crucial minutes that was more complex than the simple hero narrative the media had constructed. When the defense attorney finished, the prosecutor had an opportunity for cross-examination. His questions were sharper, designed to establish that Ryan had been a genuine threat regardless of his mental state. Guardsman Webb, you testified that any person with a loaded firearm poses a potential deadly threat. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And Ryan Holloway did have a loaded firearm that day?
Yes, sir.
So regardless of his mental state, he was capable of killing you or any of the civilians present.
That's correct.
Then your decision to disarm yourself and approach him placed yourself and others at increased risk, did it not?
Marcus met the prosecutor's eyes steadily.
In my assessment, yes, there was risk in my approach. But there was also significant risk in treating the situation as a standard armed confrontation. With armed officers surrounding us and innocent civilians in the area, an exchange of gunfire could have resulted in multiple casualties. I believe my approach offered the best chance of a peaceful resolution. That belief proved correct. The prosecutor pushed harder, trying to establish that Marcus had violated protocols and endangered lives. But Marcus remained calm, neither defensive nor apologetic. He simply explained his thinking, acknowledged the risks, and stood by his decision. After 30 minutes of cross-examination, the prosecutor finally dismissed him, clearly frustrated that he had not managed to shake Marcus's testimony, as Marcus left the witness stand. He glanced at Ryan, who was sitting at the defense table in a suit that was slightly too large for him. Ryan had gained some weight since his arrest. He looked healthier, more stable, though profound sadness still haunted his eyes. Their gazes met for a brief moment, and Ryan mouthed 2 words, "Thank you." Marcus gave a slight nod in acknowledgement before leaving the courtroom. The trial continued for another week. Patricia Morris testified about the robbery, her injuries, and the lasting impact the crime had on her sense of safety. Her testimony was emotional and powerful, reminding everyone that Ryan's actions had real victims who deserved justice. Ryan's mother testified about her son's mental health struggles and her failed attempts to get him adequate treatment. Mental health professionals testified about Ryan's condition at the time of his arrest and his progress since then. Ryan himself took the stand on the final day of testimony. He spoke about his spiral into crime, his months on the run, and the day at Buckingham Palace. His voice broke multiple times as he described how close he had come to doing something terrible. He apologized directly to Patricia Morris, though he did not expect or ask for her forgiveness. He explained that Marcus's willingness to see him as a human being had reminded him of his own humanity, when he had forgotten it existed. When the attorneys gave their closing arguments, the prosecution painted Ryan as a dangerous criminal who had made repeated bad choices and needed to be incarcerated to protect society. The defense portrayed him as a troubled young man who had made mistakes but had also shown capacity for change. When treated with compassion rather than simply punished, both narratives contained truth. Both narratives left important things unsaid. The jury deliberated for 2 full days. When they returned with a verdict, the courtroom was silent with tension. Ryan was found guilty on all charges. The question now was sentencing. The judge could impose anywhere from 5 to 20 years in prison depending on how she weighed the various factors. She scheduled the sentencing hearing for 2 weeks later, giving herself time to consider all the evidence and testimony. During those 2 weeks, Marcus found himself thinking often about Ryan and about the broader questions the case had raised. How should society respond to people who commit crimes due to mental illness and desperation? What balance should be struck between punishment and rehabilitation? How could the justice system acknowledge both the harm caused to victims and the humanity of offenders? These were not questions Marcus had expected to wrestle with when he joined the Royal Guard, but the encounter with Ryan had forced him to confront them. Marcus was not required to attend the sentencing hearing, but he chose to be there. He felt an obligation to see the process through to its conclusion. When the judge entered and everyone rose, Marcus noticed that Ryan looked calmer than he had during the trial. Perhaps he had accepted whatever fate awaited him. Perhaps he had found some measure of peace with his situation. The judge spoke for nearly 20 minutes before announcing her sentence. She acknowledged Ryan's mental health issues and the de-escalation that had prevented violence. She also emphasized the serious nature of his crimes and the harm caused to Patricia Morris. The sentence she handed down was 12 years in prison, with eligibility for parole after 8 years if Ryan demonstrated good behavior and continued mental health treatment. Ryan accepted the sentence without visible reaction. His mother wept quietly. Patricia Morris sat with her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. As court officers prepared to take Ryan back into custody, he asked to speak. The judge, somewhat surprisingly, allowed it. Ryan stood and turned toward where Marcus was sitting in the gallery. Ryan's voice was quiet but clear as he addressed Marcus directly. "I know I don't deserve your kindness or your time. I know that what I did was wrong on so many levels. But I want you to know that you didn't just save my life that day. You reminded me that I had a life worth saving. I'm going to spend these years trying to become someone who deserves that second chance you gave me. I don't know if I'll succeed, but I'm going to try. Thank you for seeing me when I couldn't see myself." Marcus nodded, his throat tight with emotion. He did not trust himself to speak, so he simply maintained eye contact with Ryan until the officers led him away. The courtroom emptied slowly, people processing what they had witnessed. As Marcus stood to leave, Patricia Morris approached him. He braced himself, uncertain what the victim of Ryan's crime would say to him. "I wanted to meet you," Patricia said, extending her hand. Marcus shook it gently. "I've thought a lot about what you did that day. At first I was angry. I thought maybe you were too soft on him, that you should have just arrested him immediately. But I've been thinking about it differently lately. I hope I didn't cause you any additional pain by my actions," Marcus said carefully. "That was never my intention." Patricia shook her head. "No, I understand now. If you had handled it differently, if there had been shooting, people could have died. Maybe children. Maybe you. Maybe even Ryan himself. As angry as I am about what he did to me, I don't think I wanted him dead. I wanted him to face what he did. And because of you, he's alive to do that. He's alive to serve his time, to maybe become better. There's something right about that, even if it's complicated." Her words stayed with Marcus long after they parted. The idea that justice could be complicated, that punishment and compassion were not necessarily opposites. That seeing someone's humanity did not mean excusing their actions, these concepts settled into his understanding of what had happened that day at Buckingham Palace. Life moved forward. Marcus returned to his duties with the Royal Guard, though his experience had changed him in subtle ways. He was more observant of people's emotional states. He was quicker to see the person behind the behavior. He remained disciplined and professional, but there was a new depth to his service. A recognition that protecting people sometimes meant protecting them from themselves. The media attention eventually faded, replaced by newer stories and fresher headlines. Marcus was grateful for the return to relative anonymity. He had never wanted fame. He had simply wanted to do his job well and help someone who needed help. The recognition felt uncomfortable, like wearing a uniform that did not quite fit. Ryan Holloway began serving his sentence at a medium security facility known for its mental health programs. He attended therapy sessions twice a week. He participated in education classes, working toward completing a degree he had abandoned years earlier. He joined a support group for inmates struggling with anxiety and depression. The work was hard, and there were days when the weight of his situation threatened to crush him. But he had made a promise to Marcus, and he intended to keep it. In the second year of his incarceration, Ryan began writing letters to Marcus. He did not expect responses. He simply wanted to share his progress, to show that Marcus's faith in him had not been misplaced. He wrote about the books he was reading, the skills he was learning, the ways he was trying to understand himself better. He wrote about confronting the damage he had caused and learning to live with guilt without letting it destroy him. Marcus did read the letters, though he debated for a long time whether to respond. Eventually, he wrote back. His letters were brief and infrequent, but they offered encouragement. He told Ryan about small victories in his own life. He shared thoughts about duty and purpose. He never preached or lectured. He simply maintained a connection. A thin thread of humanity stretched between their very different worlds. 3 years into Ryan's sentence, something unexpected happened. Patricia Maurice, the woman Ryan had helped injure during the robbery, attended a restorative justice program at the prison. These programs brought together victims and offenders to facilitate dialogue and healing. Patricia had thought long and hard about participating. Part of her wanted nothing to do with Ryan, but another part wanted to understand, wanted closure, wanted to try something that might help both of them move forward. The meeting was facilitated by trained counselors in a neutral room. Ryan and Patricia sat across from each other, years and consequences hanging heavy between them. Patricia spoke first, describing the impact of the robbery on her life. She talked about the physical pain from her broken arm. She talked about the fear that now colored her daily routines. She talked about struggling to trust people. Her words were honest and painful, and Ryan listened without trying to defend himself or minimize her experience. When it was Ryan's turn to speak, Paula calloused without qualifications. He did not blame his mental health or his circumstances. He took full responsibility for his actions and acknowledged the harm he had caused. He told Patricia about the work he was doing to change, not as an excuse, but simply as information. He said he understood if she could never forgive him. That forgiveness was not something he felt entitled to expect. The session lasted 2 hours. At the end, Patricia did not offer forgiveness, but she did offer something perhaps more valuable. She acknowledged Ryan's humanity and his efforts to change. She told him that she hoped he would succeed in becoming better. Not for his sake, but because the world needed fewer people causing harm and more people choosing to do better. It was not a Hollywood moment of reconciliation. It was something messier and more real. Something that acknowledged both the damage and the difficult work of healing. News of the restorative justice session reached Marcus through a letter from Ryan, reading about Patricia's courage in confronting her fear and Ryan's willingness to face his victim without excuses. Marcus felt something shift in his understanding of the incident's ripples. The moment at Buckingham Palace had not been an ending. It had been a beginning of multiple journeys, each person involved moving forward in their own way, carrying their own burdens, doing their own work. 5 years after that summer day in the plaza, Marcus received an invitation that surprised him. A documentary filmmaker wanted to create a film about the incident, exploring themes of compassion, justice, and redemption. The filmmaker wanted to interview Marcus, Ryan, Patricia, and others involved. Marcus was reluctant at first. He had no desire to revisit the media spotlight, but when he learned that both Ryan and Patricia had agreed to participate, he consented. The interviews were conducted separately over several weeks. Marcus spoke about his training, his assessment of the situation, and his decision-making process. Ryan spoke about his mental state at the time, his journey in prison, and the long road of making amends. Patricia spoke about her trauma, her anger, her participation in restorative justice, and her complicated feelings about Ryan's rehabilitation. Each person told their truth without trying to control how others told theirs. When the documentary aired, it did not present a simple narrative. It did not portray Marcus as a perfect hero, Ryan as completely reformed, or Patricia as either vengeful or completely forgiving. Instead, it showed the messy reality of how people tried to do better after terrible things happen. It showed that justice can take many forms, that redemption is a process rather than a destination, and that compassion does not mean the absence of consequences. The documentary sparked conversations in living rooms, classrooms, and policy discussions. Mental health advocates used it to argue for better access to treatment. Criminal justice reformers pointed to it as evidence that alternatives to purely punitive approaches could work. Law enforcement trainers incorporated its lessons into de-escalation training. The ripples continued spreading outward, touching lives far beyond the original incident. Ryan became eligible for parole after serving 8 years. His record in prison had been exemplary. He had completed his degree, maintained his mental health treatment, and served as a peer counselor for other inmates struggling with similar issues. The parole board reviewed his case carefully. Considering testimony from psychologists, prison staff, and Marcus himself, who appeared via video to speak on Ryan's behalf, the board granted parole with strict conditions. Ryan would live in a halfway house. He would continue therapy. He would perform community service. He would check in regularly with a parole officer. Any violation would send him back to prison immediately. Ryan accepted these terms gratefully. The day he walked out of prison, his mother was waiting for him, older and grayer, but smiling through her tears. The road ahead would be difficult, but at least he was on it. Marcus Webb continued serving with the Royal Guard for 2 more years before transitioning to a new role, training security personnel in crisis, intervention, and de-escalation techniques. His experience that summer day had taught him lessons that traditional tactical training often missed. He worked to pass those lessons on, teaching others that sometimes the greatest strength lay not in the willingness to use force, but in the wisdom to see when force was not necessary. On the 10th anniversary of the incident, Marcus received a letter from Ryan. He was working as a counselor at a community mental health center, helping people who struggled with issues similar to those that had once derailed his life. He had rebuilt a relationship with his mother. He attended therapy regularly. He had even reconnected with Patricia Morris, who had cautiously accepted his offer to participate in community education programs about the impact of crime on victims. Ryan wrote that he thought often about that day at Buckingham Palace, about the guard who had seen him as human when he had forgotten his own humanity. He wrote that he had spent a decade trying to live up to the second chance Marcus had given him, trying to become someone worthy of that moment of grace. He did not know if he had succeeded, but he was still trying, and he would continue trying for the rest of his life. Marcus read the letter in his office at the training center, surrounded by manuals and schedules and the ordinary details of daily work. He thought about the young man who had pointed a gun with shaking hands, about the decision he had made in that frozen moment, about all the ways that single choice had rippled through multiple lives over 10 years. He did not know if he had done the right thing. He suspected he never would know with certainty, but both he and Ryan were alive. Patricia Morris had found a measure of peace, and the world had at least one more person trying to help rather than harm. Perhaps that was enough. Perhaps that was more than enough. He folded the letter carefully and placed it in his desk drawer alongside the others. A chronicle of redemption measured not in dramatic moments, but in steady, persistent effort. Outside his office window, life continued in all its complicated glory. People making mistakes. People trying to do better. People offering second chances and people working to deserve them. Marcus turned back to his work, training the next generation to see threats as problems to solve rather than enemies to destroy. To recognize humanity even in crisis. To understand that sometimes the greatest courage required putting down your weapon and extending your hand.